it's Alice, and today I'm filming our July.
We are in August.
July wrap up. We're in the first week of August. My brain has apparently melted. It has been hot, so that's an excuse. I'm just an idiot, really. So in July, we were aiming to read 22 books, and we didn't think we'd get them all read. We ended up reading 27, but we missed 2 that we were supposed to. So we are going to be carrying over Permanent Record by Mary H.K. Choi and Mayhem by Estelle Law. Be reviewing those in our August wrap up because we started them at the end of July, and it's like the 4th now. Yeah, it's the fourth. And still haven't quite finished either of them. They're quite big, so we'll be reviewing those at the end of August, but I didn't end up giving myself a TBR punishment because I thought we've already started them. That is good enough. But it does mean that we've got 27 books to talk about, so we're going to try and do this as quickly as possible. Split it up into a few different little piles, and we've got some library books to talk about as well, so let's get into this. So one of the main focuses for July was on non-fiction reading. So in the month of July, we read Difficult Women by Helen Lewis, which we gave 4 stars. It was all about the kind of 11 fights that feminism has focused on. So like equal pay at work, and abortion access and things like that. And it's just a very interesting way because Helen Lewis focuses on some of the people who've kind of been forgotten by feminism. So they aren't the biggest names, and they did some of the most influential things. And it was just really interesting because there were a few people in there that I'd never heard of. There was some scenarios that I'd never heard of, and it was great to learn about those. Ended up giving it 4 stars because there were times when it felt a bit repetitive, and there was quite a lot of crossover on some of them. But that was a very, very solid read. We were also focusing on reading quite a bit of non-fiction regarding like racism and the Black Lives Matter movement. So I read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, and that was 4 stars. My Mother, Barack Obama, Donald Trump and the Last Stand of the Angry White Man by Kevin Powell, which I also gave 4 stars. And They Can't Kill Us All by Wesley Lowery, which was about the founding of the Black Lives Matter movement, like where the term was originally coined and what it sprung from, and that was also 4 stars, so they were all very solid reads. I'd probably recommend How to Be an Anti-Racist the most out of all of them because I think the way that Ibram X. Kendi writes it is very accessible, so he puts his lived experiences into the context of this theory of anti-racism, and then he kind of extrapolates things from the news and from other scenarios as well. So it's very well rounded. You get like the kind of biographical elements as well as the historical and the educational aspects. So that one I definitely think was the best out of the 3, but I would recommend all of them equally, and I'm very glad that I spent some time with non-fiction this month. I also took part in 3 blog tours this month. So one of them was for Mayhem by Estelle Law, but it was only an excerpt post, which is why we didn't end up reading it this month, and we'll be reviewing it next month. But I'll link my blog post for that down below if it's something that you're interested in. I also took part in the blog tour for The Ship of Shadows by Maria Kuzniar, which I reviewed back in May for Believeathon. But I just did a reread of that because I love it, and I nearly bumped it up to 5 stars for the reread. I ended up leaving it at 4 stars because it's like 4.5. There's still some things that I picked up on the second time around that I still didn't gel with, but still really love that one. I'm glad I got a chance to reread it, and I'm already thinking like when the second one comes out, I'm definitely going to want to reread the first one again. I just think this is going to become one of my favourite middle grade stories of all time. And I also took part in the blog tour for The Mall by Megan McCafferty. If you haven't heard of The Mall, it's about a girl who, surprisingly, spends a lot of time in a mall. She works in America's Best Cookie with her boyfriend, and then they break up. So she leaves her job and has to find a new job in the mall. And it's about, like, the kind of, if you work in a mall, like, I work in an outlet centre, so everybody knows everybody, and there's lots of, like, kind of incestuous relationships amongst the staff. Like, you'll move from, like, one shop to another, but you'll keep all of your relationships from there, and then everyone kind of cycles around the centre. And it was fun to see that playing out in fiction because I see it happen in real life so often. My favourite thing about The Mall is the fact that there's actually, like, a treasure hunt built into it. So, the place where our main character, I can't remember her name, which is why I'm just calling her the main character, she ends up going and working with her old friend Drea, and Drea knows about a treasure hunt that some rich guy has made in the mall. He's like hidden his riches, and she's determined that they're going to find it. So they have to find like Cabbage Patch dolls that have fake birth certificates in the back with like maps on them, and it sends them all the way around the mall, which is like a really fun concept. Like, I didn't know that was part of it, and I'm a sucker for a treasure hunt, so I definitely enjoyed that. I ended up giving it a 3-star because it was one of those books that I felt like I was both too old and too young for it at the same time, because it felt very young the way it was written. I wouldn't have believed that this was a character who was about to be heading off to college. She felt very naive, she felt very innocent and young. But then because there's so many references from the 90s, and I was born at the end of the 90s, some of the things just went right over my head as well. So it was like an awkward place to be, but I think that was like personal reasons for not enjoying that one as much as I could have. I think if I'd been born like a couple of years earlier, I would have gotten it a lot more, but I just didn't quite click with it. I'll talk about the like random oddities that we picked up, because there was a few of those this month. So we've got The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. This is the second book of the Wheel of Time series. Ended up giving this one 5 stars, so I enjoyed it a lot more than the first one. This is focused on, there's a missing horn called the Horn of Valir, and they need to find it to blow it, because if you blow it, then like the ghosts of heroes past will come and like fight evil with you, which is just a really cool concept, that like the Great Hunt is for the horn, and then the horn will kind of cause the heroes to rise from the dead. I just love that idea, and we've still got a great cast of characters in this one. I still love all of them. We meet some new people. Some of the people who just make like very brief appearances in the first one become more integral to the plot in the second one, and I just really love all of them. Like, there isn't anybody that I'm reading that I'm thinking like, I'm not too into this. Like, it took a little while to get into it because it was focused just on Rand, and considering Rand's like the main character, he is the least compelling part of this entire book, and that's saying something because it's like 800 pages. But I think as soon as it was Rand interacting with the others, like you had Loeil came back and he was with like Perrin and Matt, and the interactions between the characters and the chemistry between them makes it much easier to read. And when they're kind of talking, it just flows so quickly. Like the dialogue is really, really well written. It's just when it's Rand on himself, like by himself, that it makes me think I'm not the most into it, which is not how you normally feel about a main character, but I'm hoping that he will become more interesting as the series goes on. We also read Arsenic for Tea and First Class Murder by Robin Stevens. Ended up giving both of these 5. These are both rereads for me, and I just think that they're so brilliant. So the Murder Most Unladylike series follows Hazel Wong and Daisy Wells. Don't know why my brain just like farted for a second there. Hazel Wong and Daisy Wells, and they are the Detective Society, and they are solving crimes. Wherever they go, they're seeing 2 murders, and the murders need solving, so who better than the Detective Society? So yeah, it's a middle grade murder mystery series, so you know, that's what you'd expect. So Arsenic for Tea is set at Daisy's house at Easter. And then First Class Murder is the girls going on holiday on the Orient Express over the summer holidays with Hazel's father. So it's really interesting because you get to meet like Daisy's family in this one, and then plus some of Hazel's family in First Class. I just love this series. This is my second time reading them, and they're books that I think I could read over and over again. Like, I couldn't remember all like the ins and outs, so I liked kind of rediscovering the story, but I couldn't remember who did it in this one. Couldn't remember who done it in First Class Murder, but it was like halfway through when it kind of twigged to me. But they're just so much fun, and I love them, and I can't wait to read the rest of the series, even though I just don't want it to end. We also read this month Point Blank by Anthony Horowitz, which I've just realised I didn't bring over, and I've got no idea where it is right now, but we'll just pretend I'm holding it up. And Point Blank is the second book in the Alyce Rider series. Sean is just delivering the book. So Point Blank is the second book in the Alyce Rider series by Anthony Horowitz, and this follows Alex as he goes to a boarding school in the Alps. France? I don't know why I'm looking at the thing like it's going to tell me, because this is like 4 books in one, so it doesn't tell you. But he goes to a boarding school where people are kind of coming back and they're not the same, and there's like a mystery going on, and I could totally see where it was going, but it was so much fun. And I think compared to the first book, because this one isn't as focused on like training Alex and it's more on the mission itself, I thought this one was a lot more successful. Ended up giving it 4 stars and still really looking forward to carrying on with the rest of them. They're a bit silly, they're a bit wild, but they're a lot of fun. And that's all you can really ask when you're reading something like this. It's not too serious. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's definitely, you can feel its age, but it's exactly what I need when I'm getting a bit slumpy. And I don't get very slumpy very often, but when I'm struggling to pick up a book, if I can just read something like this, it's something I can read in one sitting, and it kind of, it's like a palate cleanser. It just refreshes the mind, and then I can jump into other things. So I think we're going to get through this series really quickly. So now I'll talk a little bit about the books that I picked out of the TBR jar. Permanent Record was one of those, so I'm not going to be able to talk about all 5 because I haven't finished all 5 of them. But it was a mixed bag this month. So we had A Problem Accessing the File for Alter of Reality by Mara Valderan? I can see it in my head, I just can't make my head make the sounds in the right order. Mara Valderan. So we actually ended up having to do another pick, and Sean picked out The Summer of Us by Cecilia Vaness for me. Ended up really enjoying this one. It was set but from the 1st to the 13th of July, so that was really fun because I started it on the 1st of July, so I read the chapters that happen each day as they happened. And this is about a group of teenagers who, before they go off to college, they go on a road trip across Europe, and they travel from location to location, seeing like Prague and Rome and Italy and France. And not only are they kind of confronting the fact that they're moving into their futures, but they're confronting their relationships with each other as well, because you've got like characters who are secretly in love with each other, and there's a relationship that's not on the best of terms. And I just found it really interesting because the dynamics between the characters are very realistic. So you've got Ray and Clara. Ray is secretly in love with Clara, but she doesn't want to tell her because she's sure that Clara is straight. So she is going to college in Australia to get as far away from Clara as possible because she just doesn't want to deal with her feelings. And then you've got Audrey and Jonah, who are together, and they are moving to New York together, going to different colleges, I believe, but planning on living together, and not breaking up their relationship. But Clara has just kissed... No, Aubrey has just kissed Jonah's best friend, Gabe. It gets a little bit confusing. Like, they have very distinct voices, so it's a bit easier to get to terms with it, but when you're just kind of introduced to them, you meet them all very quickly and you're thrown in. And I think that was one of the things that I liked the most about it, because you do get like the dynamics between the characters and it feels very realistic. They all have flaws. They feel very 3-dimensional. And it was quite reminiscent of like the way I would have felt if I'd gone on holiday with my friends from sixth form, and I think that was what made me enjoy it more, because like there would be drama and there would be tension and it would be a fun time, but you would also kind of regret going, and you would have fallings out and you would have like making up, and I just loved the way that it was written. I ended up giving it 4 stars because, like, as I said, there is some cheating and it's all kind of excused, and I'm not a huge fan of that. Like, I like it when the characters, they confront it and they deal with it and they kind of work through it, but it just kind of became a non-entity, which was an interesting choice, but that's fine. I think because I took so long reading it, I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I think I otherwise would have. Just punched the microphone. But I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I think I otherwise would have, because it felt like I kind of got to know them as friends myself because I was reading the book so slowly. So I definitely think if I've got a book that I'm reading in the month that it's set and it does split by date, I might try that again in the future. So if you've got any recommendations for books like that for the next few months, I'd be interested in trying it. I then read Not If I See You First by Eric Lindstrom, which is his debut novel, and this follows a girl who is blind. She went blind in a car accident and she runs, and it's about like the running coach like sees her running in the park, so he tries to get her to join the track team, and she's like, don't be stupid, I'm blind, like that wouldn't work. But she has to get like a running partner, and so there's her like searching for her running partner and trying to decide whether she thinks it's the right choice for her. And she's also repairing a relationship with somebody who she was friends with when she was really young. They ended up going to like different middle schools, but their high schools have just combined, or they were friends in middle school. I don't really know how the American school system works. They were friends at some point, and then he went to a different school, but now his new school's closed, so he's been forced back into her school. And she'd always said she was never ever going to talk to him ever again, but it's them working through their relationship and trying to see if what went wrong could be repaired. I thought this book was astounding. I didn't think I was going to like it. I put it off until the end of the month. I thought it was going to take me so long, and I ended up reading it in a day, and I just did not want to put it down. I gave it 5 stars. I thought the main character, most of the complaints that I've seen about this book are that the main character is really unlikable, but I thought she was brilliant. Like, she's so sassy, but she's so honest, and she says, like, because she can't see the way that people react to her, and because she can't see, like, visual cues, she doesn't really have a filter, because she doesn't feel the remorse or the guilt that people feel when they're saying things and they can see that it's hurting somebody. And I think that that's an interesting take on it. I don't know if that's how a lot of people would feel, because I feel if I was in that situation I would be more hesitant because I wouldn't be able to see their cues. But the logic behind the way that her character is and the way that she's kind of using that as a defense mechanism, I think it makes so much sense. And I like unlikable characters. I think they're more interesting to read. I think they've got a lot more nuance, and it makes the story a lot more memorable. And, like, I would want to be friends with that. I think it was just brilliant. We've got Eric Lindstrom's second book and haven't read it yet, but I think I'm going to end up picking that up soon because his writing's just great. I can see why this was so hyped, because when it came out, like, this cover was just absolutely everywhere. And I'm so glad that I've finally read it. I wish I'd read it at the time, but I just think this is going to become one of the best books I've read this year by far. So I'm really glad that I picked this one out with the jar. Then the last 2 that we read from the TBR Jar in July were a little bit disappointing. They both ended up getting 2.5 stars. So the first of the 2 was Follow Me Back by A.V. Geiger. Now I started reading this during the reading rush and then finished it on the very last day. So yes, I did read this during the reading rush. So I'll talk about that one in a minute, and then I'll segue into the rest of my reading rush books. So the first of them, with 2.5 stars, was Contagion by Terry Terry. Read the first quarter of this, was absolutely loving it. Ordered the whole trilogy off of eBay because I found it really cheap, and then really didn't enjoy the rest of it, which was ironic, because why would that? Why wouldn't I just be not liking the whole thing? Why is it as soon as I arrive I'm like, oh, this is a bit bland? Because
you've already spent the money.
Yeah, obviously my brain was like, no, this is your punishment for spending money on books you don't need. But interesting concept, good execution, but predictable twists, and that is one of my least favourite things. So you've got a girl goes missing called Callie. Our main character, who is called Shay, is the last person who saw her, but she doesn't realise that she's gone missing until a year later because she happens to stumble across her missing poster in a newsagent's. So she contacts her brother Kai and is like, I saw your sister. And Kai's like, oh shit, okay, can you give me more information? And Shay has an eidetic memory. So she's like, yeah, I can give you literally all of the information. I can remember the entire encounter perfectly. And then she makes a friendship with Kai, and they decide that they're going to try and track down Callie together. Meanwhile, Callie is our other perspective, and we meet her in a underground research laboratory where she is being tested on, and something happens, and she kind of like her consciousness separates from her body, and her mortal body passes, but her consciousness stays. So Callie is like roaming the countryside as a ghost, effectively. And so you get her story and Shay's story as they are like trying to find each other, with Shay and Kai not knowing that Callie is dead, and Callie not knowing what's happened to her and not knowing if she's going to be able to interact with people, just knowing that she wants to get to the bottom of why this happened to her. And so it's just like there's a virus that's like been released, and they're calling it the Aberdeen flu, and everybody starts dropping dead, and there's loads of places being quarantined, and people are dying all over the place. So there is a lot going on in this one, and it's probably not the best time to read it when there is a pandemic going on, because I did think that some of the ways that it played out weren't very realistic, considering what I've seen in the last few months with pandemic response. like, people really taking the quarantine seriously, and people, like, the army coming in, and then the police not listening to them because they're like, oh, well, we don't know where your orders are coming from. I feel as though, like, the emergency responses, and even if it was, like, a secret underground thing, I feel like they would have just blankly said, like, you must obey these people. But there's some conflict through it that doesn't feel authentic. Like, overall, it's interesting, but yeah, there's just, like, a thing happens right at the end that it's like, oh, well, I saw that coming within, like, the first few chapters, and the characters are really, really surprised by it, and I'm like, it just seems a bit naive that you didn't think about that earlier. And there's, like, a mysterious doctor whose identity we don't know, and it hasn't been revealed yet, and I'm going to carry on with the series because I have just ordered them because I was really enjoying this, but if it is who I think it is, it's so predictable, and it's going to really disappoint me. But yeah, I've given this one 2.5 stars because it is a good start to the series. I still really love Terry's writing. I've read her Slated trilogy. I've read the first 2 of those, and I really loved her writing in those. So her writing's not the problem. It's just some of the bits don't gel with me properly, and the romance is also just so cringy. Like, they know each other for like 2 days, and they're like, oh, we're in love forever. It's a stressful situation, so it would bring you together quicker, but it just didn't feel necessary. And so only 2.5 stars on this one for me. So then I'll talk about Follow Me Back, which, as I said, I read for the reading rush. So this is about a girl called Tessa. I don't know why my brain is just spitting out character names again. Like, this always happens. So Tessa is obsessed with a celebrity called Eric Thorne. She makes a Twitter about how, like, obsessed she is with him. And she writes a fanfic and she hashtags it with Eric Thorne obsessed. And it ends up being, like, the top trending thing. And so Eric's PA people are like, you must follow this fan. He's like, I'm going to create a separate account and I'm going to follow her and I'm going to be really mean about myself and I'm going to be really mean to her because all my fans are exactly the same. They're all crazy. And then he's like, oh, Tessa's not like other fans. And he falls in love with her. Like, cool. But, like, if you talked to any of your fans, you'd probably realise that they were human beings and you'd realise that they had personalities other than just being obsessed with you, because that's the whole thing with humans. Like, they have dimensions. It's not like, oh yeah, out of all 14 million of my fans, Tessa is the one who is also a human being. And it just frustrated me a lot. Like, I was enjoying it. I thought it was cute. I was expecting it to be more of like a thriller because the cover's very thrilling and it's like, ooh, he's like pretending to be somebody else, and I didn't expect them to fall in love. But then I was like kind of into it because I was like, oh, okay, like, it's a romance rather than a thriller. But then when the thrilling bits came in, they were just shoehorned in and they didn't make any sense and they came out of nowhere, and I was like, oh, this is the way that the story's going, and then it veered in a complete different direction, and then there was like another twist at the end, and none of it impressed me, none of it interested me. I thought that the ending was quite surprising, and I was quite like, oh wow, like, that's a good way to end it, like, that's a brave choice with the writing. And then I realised that it's got a sequel, so the only reason that she ended it the way that she did was so that she could then write the sequel. And I'm not a fan of books that don't feel like they need to be carried on, that then you just kind of add a sequel on top for no real reason. So yeah, 2.5 stars for this one. Like, I enjoyed reading it, but if it hadn't been for like the twist on a twist at the end, it would have probably ended up being a 4. Because, like, yeah, it was like, the relationship was realistic, liked the multiple perspectives. Really thought that Eric Thorne was a different way of portraying a celebrity, and for it to be like a band guy who's a bit like sour about his record deal and sour about this and that, like, it kind of reminds me a little bit of I Was Born for This, because Alyce does a very similar thing there in that she makes the members of the boy band more human and they're not just the idealised, like, media darlings that they've been made out to be. But I didn't really like that one and I enjoyed it more than Follow Me Back, so not sure whether this is just like a trope story element that just isn't going to work for me, but it wasn't the best. Now I'll carry on with the rest of our reading rush TBR because this is a good time to segue into that. So, first book we read for the reading rush was Zombie City by Darren Shan. Gave this one 3 stars. Once again, with the zombie books, this is just like an aspect of a story that could have been combined with the rest of the other volumes and been better. Because the first book focuses on, like, the character, and then the second book focuses on the kind of plot, and then this one focuses on the world, and it would just be nice if all three of those elements could be combined. And I would have enjoyed this more if it had been one big book that was edited a bit better and put together. But they're very quick, they're very easy reads. They don't really do anything for me. Like, they don't annoy me, they don't convince me to want to carry on that much. If we didn't already own the others, I probably would have only read the first one. But yeah, like, just a bit nonplussed on these. We also read The Fire This Time by Jesmyn Ward, which was another non-fiction book that we read, that we'd kind of borrowed to read with the others, but then we realised it would fit one of the Reading Rush prompts very well. I think we gave this 4 stars, just double checking. Yeah, we gave The Fire This Time 4 stars. So this was split into 3 parts. It's kind of like essays about the past, essays about the present, and essays about the future, about race in America. Absolutely loved a couple of them. I'll link our Reading Rush vlog down below because I've got like the specific names of the essays that I really enjoyed in there, and I talk about it a bit more in depth. But there was some that I didn't enjoy too much and some I absolutely loved, so I think we ended up giving it a 4 because it was like there was some 3s, some 5s, but it's a very solid collection. And if you're someone who is interested in reading different perspectives on race in America and the way that people relate to race based off of the history of America and the way that they kind of want race to develop in the future, it's a perfect read for that. We also read Postmortem by Patricia Cornwell. So this was my 3rd time reading this, but it was Sean's first time reading it, and we let Sophia pick this one for us. Person gets murdered. The murder must be solved. That's basically it. I enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars the first time I read it, 3 stars the second time. I was considering giving it like a 3.5, but decided to just leave it at 3. If you haven't read any Patricia Cornwell, she is very good at looking at like the scientific aspects, but it definitely shows its age because this is back when DNA testing was like just starting out, and they've still got like faxes and SQL systems, and yeah, it's very dated. I still enjoy it because I'm just a fan of this book. That's why it's the 3rd time I've read it. But I'm not sure. I still want to carry on with the rest of the series. I only ever got to like book 4 or 5, but I'm just not sure whether I'm going to be doing that sooner rather than later. I still couldn't remember who did it though. That's the thing. No matter how many times I like read this, I can remember all the evidence and everything that they find, and I can just never remember the way that it ends. So then I'm like, oh yeah. We also read The Crucifix Killer by Chris Carter. This was recommended by my mum. So she gave us a bag of books and we read 5 of her books this month. I've still got the others to talk about in a moment. But really enjoyed this one. Kind of saw where it was going and then second guessed myself. I was like, no, it can't be going that way. But this is about a serial killer who is carving a double crucifix into their victims when they're left. And they have been kind of working over the last few years. And now they're not sure if... because they thought they'd caught the killer. And now they're not sure whether this is a copycat or whether it's the original killer and they like somebody was framed for it. So that was an interesting aspect. Thought it was really clever, like when you eventually find out how the murders are linked and what the story is behind them, it's very, very clever, it's very intelligent because you can't see any link at all, and like the way that most serial killers traditionally work is that they will have like a link between their victims. So it's very interesting that the way that Chris Carter decides to link the murders. I can't remember what we gave this one. I think it ended up being a 4-star. Yeah, 4 stars for The Crucifix Killer, and I think a lot of that was like, it was like a 3-star, and then the twist happened towards the end, and that was what bumped it up for me, because I thought the way that the ending played out was really, really interesting. This was one that it took us a little while to get into it, but then we read like 3/4 of it in one sitting, because it just got so good that we just couldn't put it down. So if you're somebody who likes a book to start off with a bang, this might not be the one for you, but I do have a recommendation for you in a moment if that's the way that you like your crime to be. For the Reading Rush, we also read The Explorer by Catherine Rundle. This was the middle grade monthly pick for July, and we were intending to take part in the live show and then remembered at like 2 o'clock the day after it had been on, so that was great. This is another book that starts out very slowly but gets a lot better towards the end, so we almost ended up DNFing it. We were like a quarter of the way through and it wasn't doing anything for us, and then all of a sudden it just kind of clicked. So The Explorer is about a group of kids whose plane crashes in the Amazon rainforest, and they have to try and find their way home, and they end up bumping into an explorer who is living in the rainforest, and he kind of helps them survive, and he has to decide whether he's going to help them get home or not, because he doesn't want to be found, and he doesn't know whether he can trust them not to tell everybody not only where he is, but also he's in this like gorgeous area that he wants to make sure is preserved, and he doesn't want them to tell everybody about it because he wants it to be remaining in its state. And I thought that was a lovely way of getting kids thinking about the environment and thinking about the things that they tell people, and thinking about the fact that people can have ulterior motives. Like, just because you're trying to show somebody something for a good reason, it doesn't mean whether they will have a good reason and use it for good things. And I think especially with the way that there's more of a focus on like environmental things at the moment, that is a really important topic. So I can see why this won the Costa Book Award a few years ago. I think it was like 2018. Might be lying about that. I think we ended up giving it 4 stars because the ending was just gorgeous. Like, I loved from the halfway point onwards. Like, as soon as you meet the Explorer, this is a 5-star book for me. But the first half was just so slow and dreary that I just couldn't get into it. But I do love the fact that there's a lot of focus on animals, so you get to see some monkeys, some sloths, some bees. Like, if you like reading stories where you're really immersed in the environment and the world is very well crafted, then this is perfect for that. And if you like books that is set in the past but aren't overtly historical, so this is quite obviously a historical novel because of the way that like the explorers are still so famous, and it's one of those things that it's kind of died off over the years, but it's not overtly historical, it's not in your face, and I like that about it because I'm not a huge fan of historical, so definitely recommend that one. And the last book we read for the reading rush was Rise of the Governor by Robert Kirkman and J. Bolland Singer. This focuses on the backstory of the governor in The Walking Dead, zombies, Walking Dead stuff. If you like The Walking Dead, you'll like it. I gave it 5 stars. I've read it before. I loved it both times. If you don't like The Walking Dead and you don't like zombies, this is not going to be the one for you.
It's just a good zombie book.
It's just a good zombie book. Like, I think it's got like a nice little twist based off of the like Walking Dead mythology. But yeah, like I recommend it. It's just there's not really much else I can say about it. The zombie invasion starts. These people are trying to find safety. It's hard because there are zombies everywhere. So talking of read-alongs, we also read-alongs. We also took part in the BookoplAthon by Becca and the Books this month, which was 48 hours. She did a roll every 12 hours, and you could pick which prompt you chose and what book you would read to fulfill it. Read 4 books for this one. So I started off reading Dear Martin by Nick Stone, which is a book about a boy called Justice. He gets arrested because he's helping his girlfriend, but a police officer thinks that he is assaulting her. And when he kind of gets home, he starts writing letters to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because he wants to kind of express his feelings in that way. So I did kind of think for a minute that this was a historical one, because I thought he was writing to Martin Luther King as though he was like a contemporary rather than as like a historical figure. So it did throw me a little bit because that wasn't something that I didn't know that was why it was called Dear Martin. But then bad things happen and it gets really, really heartbreaking towards the end of the novel. Considering how thin it is, it has a massive impact. I ended up giving it 4 stars because I think there's just a little bit too much going on considering how short it is. I think if it had been about even just 50 to 100 pages longer, it would have been that little bit better. I can't quite put my finger on why I didn't give it 5. I just feel like there's a lot going on in this book. Like, Nick Stone tries to do a lot with this one. She's talking about police brutality. She's talking about the expectations of parents. She's talking about like the way that media treats black people, the way that things go to trial in America. There's like interracial relationships. There's a lot going on. And for a book that's just 200 pages, it does feel a little bit overwhelming. However, she has just recently released the sequel called Dear Justice, so I'm going to be reading that soon, and I'm hoping that that might add the kind of finishing touches to it. We also read Ravensgate by Anthony Horowitz. This was another book that my mum chose for us. So was The Crucifix Killer. I don't know if I mentioned that then. But either way. So Ravensgate. No, Rise of the Governor. I definitely mentioned it with Crucifix Killer. Either way. So Ravensgate is the first book in the Power of Five series. This follows a boy called Matt who his parents are dead. He gets in trouble with the police and his foster mum, who I think is his aunt, gives him up. And he gets fostered by somebody in like the middle of nowhere in Yorkshire. And mysterious things start happening. There's an old abandoned nuclear power station and he thinks that all of the villagers are kind of going down there and partying and he's a bit freaked out. And he ends up teaming up with like a journalist from the local newspaper to try and get to the bottom of what's going on. I thought this was brilliant. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I thought that the concept was really interesting, and I also love the fact that there's like, it's 5 kids, so I assume that they'd all get introduced really quickly, but you only meet Matt in the first book, so there's still another 4 to meet in the next 4 books. I don't know if there's going to be like 1 each, but these do get chunky towards the end of the series. But yeah, I can't really put my finger on why I enjoyed it so much. I don't know if it's because it's really, really different to Alex Rider, and where we just read that I was expecting it to be quite similar. But I think Anthony Horowitz writes male teenagers very realistically. The kind of conflict between like the world and their inner feelings, the way that they can't really express their feelings, but so they kind of do things like get in trouble with the police. But yeah, I don't really have words. I liked it. We also read The Disconnect by Karen David, which is a short story that Karen wrote for Barrington Stoke, which is about a competition to get kids to stop using their phones as much. So you have to like put your phone in a tub and then you can win a prize if you stay off your phone for that long. And it's kind of talking about the way that you can get teenagers less addicted to their smartphones, and that kind of like the contrast between like the fear of missing out and then actually experiencing life to the fullest because you're not on your phone all the time. I thought this was really, really good as well. Like, considering how short it was, the characters were very fleshed out. I always like the Barrington Stoke books because I think they really do distill the key aspects of the plot, and they work with authors who are so good at getting a tight plot and great character development into such a short page count. I think we ended up giving this one 4 stars. Yeah. So we gave The Disconnect 4 stars. Again, really recommend it. And the last book that we read for BookoplAthon was my favourite by far, and it was Clap on Your Land by Elizabeth Acevedo, which we gave for 5 stars. So Clap on Your Land is about 2 girls, one who lives in New York and one who lives in the Dominican Republic, and they have the same father but they don't know that the other exists, and their father's plane crashes, and that is how they discover each other through kind of their loss of him. This is written in verse, which made it perfect for a 48-hour readathon because it was so quick, and I loved the Poet X, and this is just as good. Elizabeth Acevedo does great work with her verse because she makes the setting really crafted well. The characters are very realistic. The story is gripping, and I think the contrast between the 2 sisters was great because you could really get their own identities coming through. Based off of the settings that they were in, their voices were very independent and they contrasted well with each other. I just can't recommend this story enough. Like, it was a great way of looking at grief. It was a great way of looking at like the true meaning of family and what family can mean to different individuals. It doesn't have to mean the same thing to everybody. Everyone has to kind of make their own meaning of family. It's not just based off of who you're related to by blood. And it's also a good look at like the contrast between the life in New York and the life in the Dominican Republic, because even though they are quite close geographically, they're very different culturally and they're very different economically. And I thought Elizabeth Acevedo did a really good job of exploring all of the different aspects of the differences in their lives. Everyone's been recommending this, so I'm not in the minority here, and I knew I was going to end up loving it, but I'm just glad that I got to pick it up as close to release date as I did. And yeah, really, really glad that we picked this one up. We also took part in the Schwab read along this month, and the group book for this month was The Archived by Victoria Schwab. Obviously, it's the Schwab read along. Who else is it going to be by? This was my second time reading The Archived, which is about a girl. She works as a keeper, and she has to go into these corridors where it's really hard to explain. Histories can wake up. So a history is like everyone's memories after they pass away. So when you die, your history turns up in the archive. And if you've had like a disturbed death, or if you were young when you died, you can wake up and get out into these corridors called the Narrows, and then keepers like Mackenzie need to be there to get you back into the library safely, and so you don't escape into the world and destroy people. It was my second time reading it, and I actually ended up enjoying it slightly less this time, which I was surprised by. I don't know if it's because the first time that I read this, it was the first Victoria Jar book I'd read, and I'd heard so much about her writing, and I'd heard so many hyped things that as soon as I read it, it's like, yeah, 5 stars, 100%, that is a 5-star book. This time around, I only dropped it down to 4 stars, so it's not like it dropped a lot, but there's just some aspects of it that I struggled with. So there's a lot of jumping back to when Mackenzie is being trained by her grandfather, and he is teaching her about how to be a keeper, and it jumps backwards and forwards quite rapidly, and I think that would work really, really well if it was being adapted, and it would work really great on the screen, but on the page it just feels a little bit disjointed. I also think that the concept is better than the execution. I love the idea of it, and I think that was mostly what I rated it 5 stars for in the first place, because I love the idea of it. But I think, I don't know, I don't really know what I think. I just didn't like it as much this time around. I've got a full review of it from back when I read it the first time, so I'll link that down below. That might make a bit more sense than me rambling. But we are going to carry on reading the Unbound this month, because we were planning on reading both last month, and we did not have time, because this is actually quite chunky when you look at the fact that it's both in one. But yeah, I'm still glad that I read it, and I still really enjoyed it, and I'd still really recommend it. It's just not my favourite Victoria Jar book anymore. Like, I like City of Ghosts and Tunnel of Bones a lot more, which you can't really blame me. That's about ghost hunting families and exploring the world, which I love both of those things. But I also love libraries, and so a library of the dead is a great concept. Just not as big a fan this time around, which is okay. Your opinion can change. This is why I don't reread very often, because I normally end up dropping ratings down, and I don't like doing that. So we've got 2 books left, and these are both ones that are recommended by my mum. We've got Eeny Meeny by MJ Aldridge, which is what I was mentioning earlier when I said that there was a book that started off with a bang, and if you like your crime to be very, very speedy, very, very quickly, this is perfect. So I was reading this to Sean over the phone, and I was planning on only getting about 50 pages in before I went to sleep. We ended up doing like 150 pages in one sitting, which is very unlike us. Like, normally we only do a little bit and kind of struggle, especially with crime books. It always takes us a while to get into them. So this was not what we were expecting in that regard. I think it's a very, very interesting story, because you've got a girl who is kidnapped with her boyfriend, and they wake up and they are in an abandoned swimming pool, and they're left with a gun and a phone, and the phone rings, and the person at the other end says, you've got the choice, like, you either kill yourself or you kill him, or he kills himself or he kills you. One of you has to die for the other one to survive. And throughout this book, more pairs of people are abducted, and they're left with the same decision, and it's about like kind of survivor's grief and how you make that kind of decision, like which one of you would survive if you're in this position with, like, there's they're in a relationship, there's 2 co-workers, there's a mother and her child, and it's about like how you make that decision and what you would do if you were in that situation. And I love the concept of it. I think the idea of the game is really interesting. I just think it falls apart a lot towards the end. So we ended up giving it 3 stars. If I'd been rating this based off of the first 200 pages, it would have been a 5-star. Easy. But then there's some language that's verging on transphobic. Like, I would flat out say it was transphobic, but I'm not trans, so I don't know whether trans people have read this and have related. I haven't been able to find any kind of reviews from trans readers who have said how they felt about that language being used, but it made me feel very uncomfortable, and I did say to Sean, like, oh, I'm not a huge fan of that. Also, this is a guy writing a female detective, and that's not my favourite thing. Guys writing male detectives, I like. Females writing female detectives, I like. But I could tell, I thought MJ Aldridge was a woman Like, it sounds like a female name. There's a whole, like, slew of authors who write using female names, and they get very popular, like AJ Finn, like Riley Sager. You think that they're women, and they're mostly writing about women. But I did have this moment when I was like, this is written by a guy. Because I love the character of Helen Grace, and I think she's very, very interesting, and she's got a lot of elements to her, and she's got like quite an interesting backstory, and I'm looking forward to following her in the future books. But there's bits where she's like a bit over sexualized, and it just feels very like a very male viewpoint of women. Yeah, so I could tell straight away, and then I was like, I've got to Google that because I'm pretty sure MJ Ardage is a girl. No, MJ Ardage is a bloke. And the blurb at the end purposefully uses like no pronouns and is very kind of shady. So you can tell that they are trying to market it as though this could be either a male or a female author. So it's interesting, but yeah, rushed ending and some problematic content throughout that made me a bit more hesitant to give this a higher rating. But I am still interested in carrying on with the series because I thought that the pacing was really good and the characters are really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing the way that the fallout from this book impacts the team in the future, because you've got some quite pivotal things happening very close to the end that haven't been unpacked yet, and I'm looking forward to seeing those get explored in the future, and I'm hoping that it will do it justice, because there's some good opportunities with like grief and kind of the way that the characters will need to come to terms with the events of this book, because it will have an impact on them. But yeah, definitely glad that I finally read it, because I love the cover and I've been wanting to read it for forever. I'm just a little bit underwhelmed, which is a shame. But it happens. However, The Girl in the Ice by Robert Brinzer, I ended up giving more stars. Like, this one was a 4-star read, and I was sad that I was going to like this one less than Eeny Meeny, because this was self-pubbed, or independent published. It's recently been picked up by a mainstream publisher, but it's been like Robert Brinzer's been publishing on Amazon for years. He didn't get many kind of physical copies printed because he was quite a small author, and just seems to have gotten bigger as he's released more books in this series. And this is again a guy writing a female detective, but I think that Erica Foster is a lot more realistic as a woman. I can't tell you why that is, but I just think that the way that she is written is far more believable than Helen Grace. And I think just there were some things in this that made me laugh. There were some things that shocked me. There was like some interesting twists. It was the kind of the way that the story was going was predictable, but the actual like who did it wasn't predictable, so that was interesting. It kept you on your toes. The only thing is, because it was like an independently published or like a small indie publisher, it does have quite a lot of like spelling and grammar errors through it, so that did throw me out of the story a few times because I was trying to work out what exactly was meant. So I don't know whether that's something that's going to have been changed if you do buy one of the ones that was published by Sphere, but this is one of the BookoplAthon ones, and that did throw me out a little bit, and I tried not to let it impact my rating because I don't like, it's not the author's fault, and so I don't like that to impact my rating too strongly, but it did throw me out a little bit. But yeah, this one was a really solid story. So this is about a girl who is found in the ice, surprisingly, and it turns out she's the daughter of a member of parliament, and so he's a lord and he's very rich and he's very famous and he's constantly being scrutinized. So it's the question of like, was it one of his detractors who killed his daughter, or is something else at play? And it's just a really, really interesting story. So this was probably my favourite out of the books that Mum recommended, either this or The Crucifix Killer. I mean, I loved Rise of the Governor, but I'd read that before, so that doesn't really count. But yeah, a solid story. And that was 27 books for you. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've read any of these, please let me know down below. And if you took part in the BookoplAthon or in the Reading Rush or in the Raedathon, which was when we read Rise of the Governor, then let me know down below. If you're doing the Schwab read along, talk to me. What did you think of the archive? Have you read it before? Do you like it less or more now? Can you word where I can't? Because apparently I've lost the ability to actually verbalize anything. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again soon. Hopefully I'll be able to remember more characters' names and actually remember the ratings we've given things without constantly checking my phone. Subscribe if you'd like to. I'll link my socials and stuff down below. And yeah, we'll see you again soon. Bye!